All right, the breaking news coming in. 17 opposition parties, including TMC and Oppn, plus one independent Rajya Sabha MP have signed a joint statement expressing deep apprehensions on long-term implications of the recent Supreme Court judgment upholding amendments to the PMLA 2002 and called for its review. Now remember, the Supreme Court had recently upheld the constitutional validity of the provisions of the Prevention of the Money Laundering Act, calling it a unique and a special legislation, and also underlining the powers of the Enforcement Directorate to hold inquiries, arrest people and also attach properties. Now 17 opposition parties, including the TMC, Oppn, plus one independent Rajya Sabha MP, have signed a joint statement expressing apprehensions on the long-term implications of this Supreme Court judgment, which upheld the amendments of the PMLA Act and have called for a review. So this is the breaking news that we are getting to at this point in time. There's a row over the Supreme Court judgment on the PMLA Act. Opposition MPs have signed a joint statement and have asked for a review. Now remember, just recently, the Supreme Court had upheld the constitutional validity of the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, calling it a unique and a special legislation, and also underlining the powers of the Directorate of Information Enforcement to hold inquiries, arrest people and attach property. Now what we are picking up at this point in time is that 17 opposition parties have now signed a joint statement expressing apprehensions on the long-term implications of this Supreme Court judgment on the PMLA. And my colleague Ranjita is joining us live on the broadcast for more on this. Ranjita, opposition parties ने jointly एक स्टेटमेंट साइन करा है. उस स्टेटमेंट के बारे में क्या बता सकते हैं? वो स्टेटमेंट अभी तक हमें पता लग रहा है वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने जो अपहोल्ड किया है पीएमएलए एक्ट को, प्रोविजंस को, उसके बारे में है. और क्या जानकारी है?
बिल्कुल, देखिए, जयराम रमेश जो कांग्रेस के सांसद भी हैं राज्यसभा के और कम्युनिकेशन विभाग के जनरल सेक्रेटरी हैं, उनकी तरफ से ये लेटर, 2 पन्ने का जो लेटर है वो ट्वीट किया गया है. जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट बताया जा रहा है और खासकर 18 जो राजनीतिक पार्टियां हैं उनके जो सांसद हैं उनका हस्ताक्षर है. साफ तौर पर जो पीएमएलए एक्ट है इसको लेकर सवाल या निशान थे कि आखिर जिस तरह से ये पीएमएलए एक्ट है इसके अमेंडमेंट को लेकर जो बात की गई थी, और खासकर अभी कुछ दिन पहले सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने इस पर अपना फैसला भी जारी किया था जिसमें ये कहा गया था कि किसी तरह का बदलाव इस नहीं किया जाएगा इस एक्ट में, और जो अधिकार है खासकर ईडी की बात जो हो रही है, क्योंकि ज्यादातर जो विपक्षी पार्टी है वो यही आरोप लगा रहे हैं कि ईडी का विपक्ष को कहीं ना कहीं हरास करने के लिए इस्तेमाल कर रही है केंद्र सरकार, और एक अपने जो राजनीतिक विरोधी पार्टियां हैं उन को परेशान करने के लिए, उनको दबाव में रखने के लिए पीएमएलए एक्ट का कहीं न कहीं बेजा इस्तेमाल हो रहा है. और इसी संदर्भ में ये जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट जारी किया गया है. इसमें अमेंडमेंट होना चाहिए ये कहा जा रहा है सांसदों के द्वारा, क्योंकि उनका मानना है कि चाहे वो पश्चिम बंगाल में ममता की पार्टी के पूर्व मंत्री की बात हो या फिर सत्येंद्र जैन की बात हो आम आदमी पार्टी की, इसके अलावा जिस तरह से दूसरी राजनीतिक पार्टियां, चाहे वो संजय राउत पर जिस तरह से ईडी का शिकंजा कस रहा है, इन तमाम चीजों पर केंद्र सरकार कहीं ना कहीं ईडी को अपने इशारे पर काम करवा रही है, और ये आरोप, एक गंभीर आरोप जो है वो विपक्षी पार्टियों की तरफ से लगाया जा रहा है.
बिल्कुल रंजीता, ये जो 17 ऑपोजिशन पार्टीज हैं इनमें कौन कौन सी पार्टीज है जिन्होंने ये जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट किया है साइन?
इसमें कांग्रेस पार्टी की तरफ से है, इसके अलावा टीएमसी इसमें शामिल है, शिवसेना इसमें शामिल है, इसके अलावा समाजवादी पार्टी का भी जिक्र आ रहा है कि समाजवादी पार्टी के भी जो एमएलए हैं उन्होंने भी इस पर हस्ताक्षर किया है. सीपीआई, आरजेडी, आरएसपी, डीएमके, एआईटीसी, ये तमाम जो पार्टियां हैं उन्होंने इसमें हस्ताक्षर किए हैं। तो हम माना जाए कि एक जॉइंट और एक विपक्षी पार्टियां एक साथ नजर आ रही है इस पूरे मामले को लेकर के। जो 17 अपोजिशन पार्टियों के सांसदों ने इसमें हस्ताक्षर किया है और उनका ये मानना है कि 2002 में जो ये पीएमएलए एक्ट बना है इसमें संशोधन होना चाहिए। राजनीतिक कहीं ना कहीं जो विपक्षी पार्टियों पर टारगेट किया जा रहा है, राजनीतिक ईडी अपनी देखरेख, ईडी जो है वो कार्रवाई ना करे, बल्कि जो जेन्युइन चीजें हैं, क्योंकि प्रियंका चतुर्वेदी जो शिवसेना की सांसद है, पिछले दिनों उनसे जब हमारी बातचीत हुई तो उन्होंने ये कहा कि पीएमएलए एक्ट के तहत जांच तो होती है, राजनीतिक पार्टियों को परेशान भी किया जाता है, लेकिन जो कन्विक्शन रेट है वो 1% से भी कम है। तो कन्विक्शन की जब बात नहीं है तो ऐसे में ईडी का जो बेजा इस्तेमाल है इस पर रोक लगनी चाहिए। तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट का जो जजमेंट है उस पर भी सवाल या निशान खड़े हो रहे हैं और विपक्षी पार्टियां एकजुट दिख रही है इस एक्ट को लेकर।
बिल्कुल रंजीता, बहुत धन्यवाद हमसे जुड़ने के लिए। एंड वी आर नाउ आल्सो बीइंग जॉइंड बाय एनसीपी लीडर माजिद मेमन। सर, many thanks for joining us here on the broadcast. What we are learning as of now is that 17 opposition parties have in fact signed a joint statement against the recent Supreme Court order of upholding the provisions of the PMLA Act. What are your views, sir?
Well, Supreme Court has come out with a very surprising and shocking judgment running into more than 500 pages, which we had the benefit to go through. In fact, apart from the unanimous view of all opposition political parties, even in legal circles, there has been a lot of discussion and criticism on this judgment. I will only tell your viewers, because we cannot go into details of what the Supreme Court has said. But one fundamental flaw in the judgment appears to be, and therefore, as it rightly is under demand for review or for larger bench re-examination, that flaw is that ED officers are not police officers, Supreme Court says. And if you are not police officers, the statement recorded by such officer is admissible in court. Now, this has created, a terrible problem for citizens' safety. Personal liberty is endangered, and also the powers which are being allegedly abused under political pressure or extra-legal considerations, those powers needed to be checked. I am only with respect saying that these learned 3 judges who have passed this long judgment have perhaps lost sight of the fact that the Chief Justice of India, Mr. Justice, the current Chief Justice of India, has made a public statement that there is hue and cry with regard to the abuse of power by CBI and ED officials, and there is a need to have a monitoring committee to check it. Now, this particular statement of Chief Justice of India has gone unheard by the center, by the Supreme Court, and on the contrary, now that Supreme Court has emboldened ED officers with the recent judgment, I am afraid that it would make the situation worse.
All right, sir. Many thanks for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your views. All right, we're also being joined by former Maharashtra Chief Minister and Congress leader Prithviraj Chavan. Many thanks, Sir, Mr. Chavan, for joining us here on the broadcast. Sir, what are your views? We just learned that Jairam Ramesh has tweeted that 17 opposition parties have in fact come together, signed a joint agreement against the Supreme Court's recent order of upholding the PMLA provisions of the PMLA Act. What do you have to say? What is your take?
Well, we are all absolutely shocked to hear the Supreme Court judgment given by Justice Khanwilkar on the various cases which have all been combined together on with different aspects of Prevention of Money Laundering Act. It was really unfathomable how the Honorable Justice Khanwilkar, Honorable Supreme Court, reached that conclusion. Now that 17 parties have come together. Apparently, I just heard that all opposition parties have come together and signed a joint statement. I think I plead with the Honorable Chief Justice that this statement of the opposition parties should be treated as a PIL, and the matter should be taken up by a full constitution bench. Because what has happened, it has completely turned the principle of jurisprudence completely upside on its head. The fact that a person has to be considered innocent till proven guilty, that bail is a right and not an exception, imprisonment is a right. Now, if you're putting people and imprisoning people for unlimited time with no recourse at all, you're not giving them the copy of the complaint at the what they call ECRI, so that he doesn't even know how to seek bail. I mean, all these things are extremely worrying. I mean, we've got a new jurisprudence now through this Prevention of Money Laundering Act. The new criminal jurisprudence is before us. I think if we want to maintain the dignity of the law, I think the Supreme Court must treat this statement, or otherwise there are many petitions also must be before the Supreme Court. Appeals must be pending before the Supreme Court. But they must combine all that and hand us over to a constitutional bench of maybe 5 or 7 justices and look at the whole aspect of PMLA threadbare. The original justification for PMLA was to curb terror funding. Now we have gone far away from the original concept. And look at the number of cases registered after the Modi government has come into power. It's being used as a coercive tool for breaking governments, for blackmailing people into submission. I think this is absolutely unacceptable. I think this must be looked at by the Honorable Supreme Court afresh with a constitutional bench.
Right, Mr. Chavan, many thanks for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your views. And 17 opposition parties, including the TMC and Oppn, plus one independent Rajya Sabha MP, have signed a joint statement expressing deep apprehensions on long-term implications of the recent Supreme Court judgment upholding amendments to the PMLA 2002 Act and called for its review. Now, remember, this is over the recent Supreme Court order of upholding the constitutional validity of the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, calling it a unique and a special legislation and underlining the powers of the Directorate of Enforcement to hold inquiries, arrest people and attach property. And now 17 opposition parties, including the TMC and Oppn, plus one independent Rajya Sabha MP, have signed a joint statement expressing deep apprehensions on the long-term implications of this recent Supreme Court judgment, which upheld amendments to the PMLA 2002 Act and called for its review. Now, remember, only recently the Supreme Court has upheld the constitutional validity of the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and called it unique and a special legislation. And now there is a row that has erupted over SC judgment on PMLA. All right, I'm now being joined by Tausif Khan, who is a TMC supporter, on the phone line. So many thanks for joining us here on the broadcast on Mirror Now. My first question to you is: we are just learning that 17 opposition parties have in fact signed a joint agreement, which has sought the Supreme Court to review its recent order of upholding the amendments to the provisions to the Money PMLA Act. What are your thoughts on it?
Yes, the court in its judgment, which it had passed, was very surprising because it had left certain aspect of the judgment, were left open for the higher authority, for the largest bench to consider, and that is why this joint petition is filed, because under the law there is a provision for review. The Supreme Court sit on a review of its own judgment and make amendments accordingly, and therefore this petition has been filed by the joint opposition parties, because this judgment is going to have a far-reaching implications for our democracy, especially in today's season when we see that BJP's government are anchored in political vendetta, where the actions of ED or any other central agencies we see very clearly shows that it is motivated by political vendetta when only one-sided action is taken. And therefore, in the light of the current happening, the judgment that was delivered requires a review by the Supreme Court, and therefore this petition has been filed.
Right, Mr. Khan. Also, during the judgment, the Supreme Court had very categorically called it a unique and a special legislation.
Absolutely unique and special legislation with a central agency with powers in the hands of the central government. But look at the how this agency functions and what is the report card of the agency. That also has to be seen. I mean, if you compare ED with other agencies, the conviction rate, it's hugely discussed. It is all over the debate that the conviction rate is so less and it moves only in one direction. Even the number of raids, which has dramatically increased in the BJP regime. During the UPA regime, the number of raids were less. The number of conviction was a little higher. And then you see now, if you compare under BJP regime, the raids have increased. There is no conviction. So the process, cannot become the punishment. There are senior Supreme Court judges very vocal on this issue, that the process itself cannot be allowed to become a punishment. If the law of the country provides for a judicial process that has to be completed, and if anyone found guilty after the due process will face the law. Just because you file a case and there is a continuous harassment of the accused, that is not what the law envisages.
Right, Mr. Khan. Many thanks for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your views. All right, and there has been a row over the SC judgment on the PMLA Act, and the opposition MPs have in fact signed a joint statement. And opposition Jairam Ramesh of the Congress has said that the opposition is apprehensive of long-term implications of the SC order. He's also gone on to say that the opposition is calling for a review of the SC order. Jairam Ramesh has in fact tweeted that whole joint statement out, and 17 opposition parties, including the TMC and the AAP plus one independent Rajya Sabha MP, have signed a joint statement expressing deep apprehensions on long-term implications of the recent Supreme Court judgment upholding the amendments to the PMLA 2002 and called for its review.